Right here, sir. Enjoy your evening.
Vanessa Hale had given exactly 45 minutes to first dates for the better part of a decade. A rule she'd built after one too many evenings wasted on men who couldn't hold a conversation past the appetizer. And she was 17 minutes past that limit. Sitting alone at a corner table in one of the city's most expensive restaurants, when the host approached her a third time to ask, with visible discomfort, whether she'd like to go ahead and order, she said no. She didn't fully understand why she said no. Given that every rational instinct she'd built over years of dating in a city full of unreliable men was telling her to leave, pay for her wine, and never think about tonight again. But something about the profile she'd read 3 days earlier, careful, funny, oddly specific about small things like the sound of rain and the exact way his daughter said good morning, had made her curious enough to keep her seated a full hour past when she'd normally have walked out. She had no idea, sipping the last of a second glass of wine, that the man she was waiting for was standing at that exact moment in a rideshare pickup lane 4 blocks away, folding a white cane with practiced hands, while his 6-year-old daughter tugged gently at his sleeve to guide him toward the restaurant's front door. Both of them rushing to make up for lost time neither of them could see coming. Vanessa did not yet know that her date was blind. He had not told her. And in 9 minutes, when he walked through that door with his daughter's small hand wrapped around 2 of his fingers, Vanessa was about to learn exactly why. Before we continue, if you believe that kindness has no rank and grace wears no uniform, please like this video, subscribe to The Overlooked, and share this with someone who needs to believe in people again today. Ethan Cole had lost his sight 4 years earlier, at 31. Following a car accident that had taken almost everything from him in the space of a single icy morning commute. Not his life, which the paramedics who arrived first genuinely hadn't been certain about for the first several minutes, but his vision entirely and permanently. The result of trauma to both optic nerves that no surgery, no specialist, no amount of hope his wife Melissa had initially offered him could reverse. He had spent the first year afterward in the kind of grief that doesn't have a clean shape, learning to navigate a world that no longer offered him the one sense he'd built his entire life around, relearning how to cook, how to work, how to simply move through his own home without the constant small collisions of relearning everything from scratch. Melissa had stayed through that first brutal year, technically, physically present in the house. But Ethan had watched, with a clarity that had nothing to do with his eyes. The specific slow withdrawal of a person deciding, piece by piece, that this was not the life she had signed up for. She left when their daughter Poppy was too. Citing reasons that shifted depending on which version of the conversation Ethan revisited in his memory. But that all circled back, eventually, to the same unspoken truth. She had not wanted to spend the rest of her life married to a blind man. And she had not found a way to say that honestly. So she had said a dozen other things instead and left anyway. Ethan had raised Poppy alone for the 4 years since, building a life that outsiders often assumed must be impossibly difficult, and that Ethan himself, most days, experienced as simply his life full, exhausting, occasionally very funny, and organized around a partnership with his daughter that had formed so early and so completely that Poppy, now 6, guided her father through the world with a competence and calm that startled adults who watched her do it. Tugging gently at his sleeve or his fingers to indicate a curb, a doorway, an obstacle, narrating the world around them in a running commentary, she'd started offering unprompted before she was even 3 years old, as though some instinct in her had understood, long before she had words sophisticated enough to explain it, that her father needed a second set of eyes and had decided without anyone asking her to, that she would be them. Ethan had not dated seriously since Melissa left. He had tried twice. Both times through friends' well-meaning introductions that had gone nowhere once his blindness came up. Both times watching, with the specific practiced detachment of someone who has learned to expect it. The other person's voice shift into the careful, over-accommodating register people use once they've decided you're fragile, rather than simply different. He had signed up 4 months earlier for a matchmaking service, A coworker recommended specifically because it built compatibility around lengthy personality questionnaires rather than photographs. An approach that appealed to Ethan for reasons that had less to do with vanity than with a genuine desire to be matched with someone based on who he actually was rather than any assumption a photo might. Triggered before either party heard a word out of the other. He had matched with Vanessa Hale 6 weeks into using the service, and they had exchanged messages for nearly a month before agreeing to meet in person. Clever. Funny messages that Ethan dictated through voice-to-text software. That made him laugh out loud in his kitchen more than once. That had left him more nervous about tonight than he'd expected to feel about anything in the 4 years since his accident. He had not told her he was blind. It was not, he told himself repeatedly over the preceding weeks, a deliberate deception, simply an omission that had started small and grown heavier with every exchange that didn't include it, until the absence of the information began to feel, to Ethan, like its own kind of lie. One he kept meaning to correct and kept finding reasons to delay. Terrified in a way he hadn't fully admitted to himself that tonight would end exactly like the 2 attempts before it. The moment of careful, over-accommodating politeness that always arrived right before the goodbye that never turned into a second date. The dark, chaotic part of that evening started with a scheduling error that was entirely Ethan's fault and had nothing to do with his blindness at all. A rideshare driver who canceled at the last minute, a backup car that took 20 extra minutes to arrive, a first date already fraught with nerves now compounded by the specific, stomach-dropping panic of being significantly late to something he'd spent a month building himself up to attempt. Poppy, sensing her father's tension the way she sensed most things about him, had spent the ride, quietly narrating their progress through traffic in a stream of reassurance disguised as commentary. We're moving now. Daddy, there's the big blue building. We're close. The same steady presence she offered him every single day. Now doing double duty as emotional support for a nervousness she was too young to fully understand, but old enough to feel radiating off him. They arrived at the restaurant, 58 minutes late. Ethan, standing on the sidewalk with his cane unfolded, and Poppy's hand wrapped around 2 of his fingers, said quietly to his daughter, "I need you to help me find someone at a corner table." "A woman? I don't know exactly where she'll be sitting," Poppy said, with the total unbothered confidence of a 6-year-old who had done this exact job 1,000 times before in 1,000 other rooms. "I got it. Daddy, I'll find her." Vanessa Hale, meanwhile, had reached the specific decision point every person who has waited too long on a first date eventually reaches the moment where staying starts to feel less like patience and more like something worth examining. She had just decided, glass empty, to ask for the check when the restaurant's front door opened and a small blonde girl walked in ahead of a man with dark glasses and a white cane, folded partway in one hand. The girl's other hand wrapped firmly around 2 of his fingers, guiding him with a fluid, practiced confidence that made it immediately clear this was not their first time navigating a space. Together, Vanessa watched them for a moment with the ordinary passing interest of a stranger noticing a stranger, entirely unaware that the man's name spoken a moment later by the approaching host in a hushed, apologetic tone directing them toward her table, was about to rearrange everything she thought she understood about the evening. "Ethan Cole, table 4," the host started, glancing at his reservation list, then toward Vanessa's table. And Vanessa felt her own name being said in the same breath, and understood, with a jolt that traveled the length of her spine, that the blind man being guided across the restaurant by his 6-year-old daughter was the date she had been waiting 58 minutes for. Her first reaction, one she would examine with some private embarrassment for weeks afterward, was not warmth. It was a fast, complicated wave of confusion and, underneath it, an unwelcome flicker of something closer to disappointment, not at Ethan's blindness specifically, but at the sudden vertigo of realizing the entire month of witty, easy messages she'd exchanged had happened with someone who had left out something this significant. A small, private alarm about what else might have gone unsaid. Ethan, arriving at the table with Poppy's guidance, said, before Vanessa had fully composed whatever expression was currently on her face, "I owe you 2 apologies tonight instead of 1. I'm sorry we're late, and I'm sorry I didn't tell you I'm blind. I kept meaning to, and I kept being afraid of exactly this moment, and I ended up making the moment worse by avoiding it. That's on me." Vanessa sat with that for a long beat, watching this man stand at her table with genuine, unguarded honesty instead of the practiced smoothness most first dates arrived with, his small daughter beside him, watching Vanessa's face with the same careful attentiveness she clearly applied to reading every room her father entered. Vanessa said, "Finally, I was about to leave." Ethan said, "I understand if you still want to. I wouldn't blame you." Poppy, unprompted, looked up at Vanessa and said, with total 6-year-old sincerity, "He's really nice. He just gets nervous about the blind thing because my mom left because of it, and he thinks everyone's going to do that." The restaurant, or at least Vanessa's small corner of it, went very quiet. Ethan's face, Vanessa noticed, had gone somewhere between mortified and defeated, clearly having never intended for his daughter to say precisely that sentence to precisely this stranger. But something about the plain, unfiltered truth of it, delivered not as manipulation but as the simple, devastating honesty only a child offers without calculation, moved Vanessa in a direction her earlier flicker of disappointment hadn't anticipated. She said, "Sit down. Both of you. I already ordered wine I'm not going to finish alone, and I'd rather hear the real story than the polished version." What followed over the next 2 hours surprised Vanessa considerably more than the evening's chaotic start had. Ethan, once the initial tension eased, turned out to be exactly the person his messages had suggested, funny in a dry, understated way. Genuinely curious about Vanessa's work running a mid-sized healthcare logistics company, entirely unself-conscious about the specific adaptations his blindness required, describing them with the same matter-of-fact clarity he might use to describe any other logistical detail of his day. Poppy, meanwhile, ate her dinner with the specific opinionated commentary of a 6-year-old fully at ease in adult company, occasionally narrating small details of the restaurant to her father in the same unconscious running commentary. Vanessa gradually understood was simply how this particular family functioned, a fluency between the two of them that Vanessa found. By the second hour, genuinely moving to witness, Vanessa asked, at one point, why he'd waited so long to date again. Ethan told her honestly about the 2 failed attempts, about the specific quality of pity that had ended both of them before they properly started, about the particular exhaustion of being repeatedly reduced to his blindness rather than met as a whole person who happened to also be blind. He said, "I almost didn't message you back after we matched. I kept waiting for the conversation to feel like it was building toward the moment I'd have to explain myself. And it never did, and that made me more nervous somehow." Not less, Vanessa said, "I don't need you to explain yourself. I need you to keep being exactly as honest as you were 5 minutes after you sat down. Instead of exactly as evasive as you were for the month before it." Ethan laughed, surprised and genuinely delighted, in a way Poppy noticed immediately. Glancing up from her dessert with the quiet satisfaction of a child, clocking something good happening to her father, they did not fall instantly, cinematically in love that night, in the way the evening's dramatic opening might have suggested a lesser version of this story would demand. What happened instead was smaller, and, in its own way, more durable. A second date 2 weeks later, without Poppy this time, followed by a third that included her again. A slow accumulation of trust built the way most real things are built, in small, consistent choices rather than single dramatic gestures. Vanessa, over the following months, learned the specific rhythms of Ethan and Poppy's partnership, learned when to offer help, and when Poppy already had it handled, learned that the running commentary Poppy had performed since she was 3 had never once been a burden to her, but simply the shape their love for each other had taken, and found herself, somewhat to her own surprise, wanting to become part of that shape rather than an outsider observing it. A year after that first chaotic, 58 minutes late dinner, Ethan proposed to Vanessa in the same restaurant, at the same corner table, with Poppy now 7, having been let in on the plan weeks in advance and sworn with great ceremony to secrecy she had guarded with fierce 7-year-old pride, standing beside him holding the ring box because Ethan characteristically honest about his own limitations. Had told Vanessa months earlier that he trusted his daughter's hands with this particular job more than his own uncertain reach across a table. Vanessa said yes before he finished. It's the question. And Poppy, unable to contain herself any longer, said, loudly enough for the surrounding tables to hear, I told you she wouldn't leave like Mom did, which made Ethan laugh so hard he had to steady himself against the table, and made Vanessa cry in the specific happy, undignified way she'd spent years being too composed in public to ever previously allow herself. If this story moved you, please like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to The Overlooked for more stories of courage, grace, and the small human moments that change everything. And tell us in the comments, has someone's honesty, even when it was awkward or came at the worst possible moment ever, ended up being exactly what you needed to hear?